question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Bradfield.
Madam Deputy Speaker, today's debate is not, as those opposite would like to have us believe, about whether an improved broadband infrastructure for Australia is a good thing. Of course, an improved broadband infrastructure for Australia is a good thing. Today's debate is very precisely about this question. Is it a good idea, in advance of committing $43 billion of taxpayers' money, to do two things: require a business case which meets normal commercial standards and require a cost-benefit study to be conducted by the well-respected organisation, the Productivity Commission? That is the question before the House, and I want to make 3 points in the brief time available to me. Firstly, to conduct a cost-benefit study is a manifestly sensible thing which should be done with this regulatory initiative, as it should be done with every substantial regulatory initiative. Secondly, it is not true that this bill will involve any slowdown in the building of the national broadband network. And thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to make the point that in a circumstance as we have here, where the executive government has manifestly failed to live up to reasonable standards of transparent decision-making, it has manifestly failed to live up to its own standards as to how the case for an enormous project of this kind ought to be made. This is surely precisely the kind of instance where the Parliament should step in to insist on a higher standard of scrutiny. If the new paradigm means anything, Madam Deputy Speaker, it means that these are circumstances in which the Parliament should step in to require that a cost-benefit study be conducted. My first point, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is widely accepted that a cost-benefit study is a good discipline before any major regulatory initiative. I quote the Commonwealth Government's Best Practice Regulation Handbook, which says, "The Australian Government is committed to the use of cost-benefit analysis to assess regulatory proposals to encourage better decision-making." The second point I want to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that this is not about delay. Let's be clear. To date, 4,000 premises have been passed by the network in Tasmania. A further 10,000 will be passed by mid-July next year. These are tiny, tiny fractions of the complete network build of 10 million premises which is proposed, and on the mainland much less has been done than in Tasmania. So there is no prospect of this bill materially slowing down the build of the network, even if it were the case, as it is not, that this bill in any way requires that the build be suspended while the cost-benefit analysis goes on. It does not. Simply, this bill is designed to ask, is the way that we are proceeding the most sensible way to build a broadband network? For example, Clause 5(2)(b). It requires the consideration of the different options by which broadband services of particular speeds could be made available to all Australians, and an estimate of the likely time frame and cost of each option. In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, the outcome of this work will not be a simple yes or no. If it finds, for example, that the present model cannot be justified in terms of the benefits which are delivered for the costs, there may very well be other models which emerge. So it is not at all the case that this is about stopping broadband. It is simply about saying, before we embark on this huge project, let's do some standard analysis to see whether the design of it is sensible. And my third point, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is precisely the kind of circumstance where a new paradigm parliament should step in to insist on a higher standard of scrutiny. If I can quote what the member for Lyons said on the 7th of September in talking about outcomes from negotiations he and other independents had held with the Labor Party. He said, "This is a good and big outcome from this process, and one that hopefully demonstrates that this is not going to be a weak parliament, this is going to be a strong parliament." And those are important sentiments. This should be a strong parliament. Ordinarily, when an executive government had manifestly failed to live up to its own standards, to its own stated principles as to how a project of this scale ought to be carried out, ordinarily there would be nothing this parliament could do. But these are not ordinary times, Madam Deputy Speaker. We do have a parliament which has the capacity to impose the proper discipline on this executive government to require that there be a cost-benefit study before this massive expenditure is committed to, and I commend the bill to this House for that reason.